Thank you and welcome to the first of a number of classes on the subject of the Kabbalah of Shabbos. Shabbos is a central pillar of our observance, and before we get into the Kabbalah of Shabbos, what I'd like to do is to take you first of all on a scriptural tour of the places in the Torah which mention Shabbos, and ask a number of questions. And once we've gone through the source material, the questions, then we can use that as a springboard to the discussion on a more esoteric level. So let's start at the beginning. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. In the beginning, Hashem made the heavens and earth. And there, after the account of the 6 days of creation, it says, "Thus the heaven and the earth were finished, and all their array. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he abstained on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it he abstained from all his work which God created to make." Now, in that short paragraph, the Torah tells us that Hashem finished his creation, he abstained from all the work which he had done, he blessed the Shabbos day, and then he sanctified it because he had abstained from all his work on that day. It says that Hashem finished his work on the seventh day. The implication actually is that he finished by the seventh day, although it says that he actually finished on the seventh day. So our sages learn from here that in fact there was one thing that was missing, which was completed on the seventh day, and that was the concept of menucha, of tranquility. So Hashem finished creating as Shabbos came in, and there came in, then there was created menucha, rest and tranquility. No Melaka was done on the seventh day, and a special blessing was given. What was the blessing of the seventh day? So Rashi says over there that this was the blessing of the mon, the manna, the double portion, later that was to be given on Friday. So here, although we're in Bereshis, the Torah is speaking of a later event of how Hashem would bless the seventh day by the double portion of manna that would fall on the Friday. And he sanctified it so that no mon fell on the Shabbos day. As we move forward into Parshas Beshalach, where there is the account of the mon, the Torah says that a double portion fell on Friday and nothing fell on Shabbos. And the Torah says, Ru'u, see that Hashem has given you the Shabbos. That is why he gives you on the sixth day a double portion of bread. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man leave his place on the seventh day. And the people rested on the seventh day. So the Torah uses the expression Ru'u, see. Why does it say Ru'u, see? Because they themselves saw with their own eyes that Hashem had sanctified the Shabbos day by the fact that he'd given a double portion of manna on Friday and nothing fell on Shabbos. In that it was sanctified. The Torah adds there that every person is to remain in their place. There are restrictions on journeying, going beyond a certain boundary, and the people rested on the seventh day. And now we get in the Parsha of Yisro to the first set of the 10 Commandments. The fourth of the 10 Commandments is Zocher es Yom HaShabbos lekadsho. Remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. 6 days shall you work and accomplish all your work, but the seventh day is Shabbos to Hashem, your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maidservant, your animal, and your convert within your gates. For in 6 days Hashem made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Hashem blessed the Shabbos day and sanctified it. So here we have the additional element of zocher, of remembering the Shabbos day. Chazal explain, zocher means kadshehu b'kenisosoi u'b'yitziosoi. Sanctify the Shabbos day by a verbal declaration at its inception and at its end. This is what we do when we say Kiddush on Friday night, when we sanctify Shabbos when it comes in, and when it finishes on Motzei Shabbos, we say Havdalah. Another interesting phrase over here, it says, Sheishes Yamin Tavod, 6 days you shall work. It implies that, in fact, it's an obligation to work in the 6 days of the week. And some commentaries actually enumerate that as one of the positive commandments of the Torah, that one should work during the 6 days of the week. Then the Torah prohibits us from doing any work on Shabbos with a detailed list of who can't work. And finally, and most importantly, the reason why Hashem commanded us to keep the Shabbos is because he himself rested on the seventh day. And that's why we are bound to sanctify that day. In Mishpatim, again, the Torah says 6 days you shall accomplish your activities, and on the seventh day you shall desist, so that your ox and donkey may be content, and your maidservant son and the sojourner may be refreshed. Again, a great emphasis on not just the person themselves, but also their household and possessions should refrain from work and be refreshed. In the parsha of Kisisa, which is talking about the construction of the Mishkan, Hashem said to Moshe, saying, now speak to the Bnei Yisrael, saying, however, you must observe my Shabbos, for it's a sign between me and you for generations, to know that I am Hashem who makes you holy. You shall observe the Shabbos, for it's holy to you. All desecrators shall be put to death, for whoever does work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among its people. For 6 days work may be done, and the seventh day is a day of complete rest. It's sacred to Hashem. Whoever does work on the Shabbos day shall be put to death. The Bnei Yisrael shall observe the Shabbos to make the Shabbos an eternal covenant for their generations. Between me and the children of Israel, it's a sign forever that in a 6 day period, Hashem made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Now, it's interesting that the Torah, over quite a number of Sedras, talks about the construction of the Tabernacle, of the Mishkan. It starts in the Seder of Truma, then it goes on to Tzaveh, and then Kisisa. And what it does, it talks about, first of all, the instruction to build the tent, and then the vessels, and then at the end it says, and all that construction, however, cannot be done on Shabbos. Because Shabbos is, and here it introduces the concept of a sign between Hashem and the Jewish people. An ois, it's a sign between them. In fact, it's interesting that tefillin is also called a sign, and you don't need two signs at the same time, which is why we lay tefillin only during the weekday, because during the weekday, the tefillin are the sign between us and Hashem. And on Shabbos, Shabbos itself is the sign, and hence we don't lay tefillin on Shabbos. Also in this passage, we have the concept of capital punishment and excision for desecrators. The Torah emphasizes it's an eternal covenant. Why? To show that Hashem made heaven and earth in 6 days and then rested. And we have an additional word over here, vayinofash, Hashem rested and was refreshed. Hashem himself rested and was refreshed. Now, as mentioned previously, the construction of the tabernacle spans a number of sedras in the instruction of Hashem to Moshe. And then in the sedras of Vayakel Pekudei, Moshe gives over that instruction to the Jewish people. But there's a very interesting thing that happens over here. When Moshe gives the instruction over to the people, he reverses the order that Hashem told him. So in fact, at the beginning of Vayakel, before he goes on to give the instruction to build the Mishkan, he precedes everything by talking about Shabbos. It says, Moshe assembled the entire assembly of the Bnei Yisrael and said to them, these are the things that Hashem commanded to do them. On 6 days work may be done, but the seventh day shall be holy for you, a day of complete rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbos day. So, number one, what is interesting is, why does Moshe reverse the order? Why does he start with the prohibition of Shabbos? And also what's interesting is that he details one aspect of Shabbos, that a fire should not be kindled in all your dwelling places of Shabbos. Now, from the juxtaposition of the construction of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, to the prohibition of Shabbos, our sages in Masechta Shabbos learn that when the Torah says do not do Melaka, work on Shabbos, what type of Melaka does it mean? After all, if you asked 100 people, what does work mean? They'll all give you different definitions because it becomes very subjective. Therefore, the Torah places the word Melaka by Meleches HaMishkan and says, don't do any Melacha. So Chazal learn the Melacha which is prohibited on Shabbos is that Melacha that was done in the construction of the Mishkan. And the Mishnah in Shabbos and the Gemara details Lamed Tes Melachas, the 39 categories of work which was done in the Mishkan, and those are prohibited to be done on Shabbos. In the parsha of Emor, which talks about the festivals, again, there's an interjection there. For 6 days, labor may be done, and the seventh day is a day of complete rest, a holy convocation. You should not do any work, for it's Shabbos for Hashem in all your dwelling places. And in fact, the rabbis ask, what is the connection between the keeping of the festivals and Shabbos? And they say that somebody who keeps the festivals, it's as if he keeps all the Shabbos, and somebody who desecrates the festivals, it's as if they desecrate the Shabbos. In the parsha of Shalach, there's a fascinating episode about the Mekoshesh Eitzim, a man who went out gathering wood on Shabbos. He was found, he was brought to Moshe and Aaron. They put him in custody because they weren't sure what should be done to him, and Hashem ordered the capital punishment for him. He was called the Mekoshesh Eitzim. So in fact, that prohibition of work and its capital punishment was actually inflicted upon somebody who desecrated the Shabbos in the desert. Who was this desecrator, and why did it desecrate Shabbos? Finally, in the Sedra of Eschanon, we have the repetition, the second time, of the Ten Commandments. There are those that say that the first set of 10 Commandments were the 10 Commandments written on the first tablets of stone that Moshe Rabbeinu smashed when he came down from the mountain, when he saw the people worshiping the golden calf. And the second set of tablets, on those were written the words which were in Va'eschanan. There are variations between the two, as we'll soon see. One of them is in the mitzvah of Shabbos. In the first set of the commandments, it says, Zocher es Yom HaShabbos, remember the Shabbos day. In the second set, it says, Shomer, guard the Shabbos day. And in fact, the Gemara says, what was actually said by Hashem? So the Gemara says, they were said simultaneously. But a clear analysis of the text in the second set of tablets, in the Fourth Commandment, let's read through it and you'll see quite a variation. The Torah says, safeguard the Shabbos day to sanctify it, as Hashem your God has commanded you. 6 days shall you labor and accomplish all your work, but the seventh day is Shabbos to Hashem your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maidservant, your ox, your donkey, your every animal, and your convert within your gates, in order that your slave and your maidservant may rest like you. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Hashem your God has taken you out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Hashem your God has commanded you to make the Shabbos day, which is a very different concept than is mentioned in the first set of the commandments. In the first set, we're told to keep Shabbos because Hashem rested on the seventh day in creation. In the second set, it says that we should keep Shabbos because we're servants of Hashem. And Hashem took us out of Egypt. And therefore, we are now servants of Hashem, and therefore we must keep the Shabbos. And we must also allow all our servants to rest on Shabbos. Why the difference in reason in the second set of tablets than the first set? One final reading. There's an interesting passage in Yechezkel, the Novi, chapter 46, verse 1. And it says there the following: Thus said the Lord Hashem Elohim, the gate of the inner courtyard that faces eastward shall be closed during the 6 days of labor, but on the Shabbos day it shall be opened, and on the day of the new moon it shall be opened. There was a certain gate in the inner courtyard of the temple which faced eastwards that was closed the 6 days of the week, but it was open on Shabbos. Why? Okay, so we've had a little tour of all the references in the Chumash to the Shabbos day. We've asked a number of questions. Let's step out of that for a minute and ask some general questions before we go into the esoteric interpretation of Shabbos. Question number one: what does it mean that Hashem rests on the seventh day? We operate different than Hashem. For us, when we work hard, we get tired, we invest ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and we tire. And therefore, we need to rest. But Hashem is infinite. Hashem doesn't get tired from creating. So in what sense does Hashem need to rest? And vayinofash, in what sense does he get refreshed? Question number two: what is the link between the prohibition of Melaka and the construction of the Mishkan? That the Torah puts the two together to teach us that that which is prohibited on Shabbos is any work activity that was made, that was there in the Mishkan. What is the connection between the two? And finally, what is the difference in the reason given in the first set of commandments that the reason for Shabbos is because it's a sign, an eternal covenant that we, the Jewish people, are expressing our belief, emunah, faith, in the fact that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And in the second set, what is expressed was an act of service, that the reason that we keep Shabbos is because Hashem took us out of the land of Egypt. Now let's step into a esoteric concept. Kisheishes yomim osa Hashem es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. In 6 days, God made the heaven and earth. The Torah tells us that God made man in his image. Ki b'tselem Elokim nivra ha'adam. Man is made in the image of God. Job, Eov, describes the soul as a chelek Eloka mimal mamash, as a veritable part of God, as explained by the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, chapter 2. If we aggregate all souls together, if we pool all the souls together, if you think of it in terms of candles, that each soul is a candle, as King Solomon said, Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, the candle of God is the soul of man. So God placed numerous candles in numerous locations to illuminate those locations. If you pool all those candles together, that's what we call Knesset Yisrael, the national soul pool of the Jewish people. We could also call it the Shekhinah, the indwelling of the divine, because it's the aggregate sum total of all the parts, if you want, the Chelek Eloka Mimal of Neshamas, which are invested in this world. Now, since Hashem created us in his image, it therefore follows that whatever mode Hashem is in, that is reflected within the souls of Israel. Let's now have a look, therefore, at the 6 days of creation. In the 6 days of creation, Hashem was in the mode of creating, of making. On the 7th day, resting and being refreshed. It follows that that pattern is to be reflected within the soul as well. In the 6 days of the week, the soul is in the creative making mode, and on the 7th day, the soul is in the tranquil, refreshed mode. Let's have a look. What does work mean for Hashem? We obviously, as we mentioned beforehand, can't ascribe a human dimension to it. So let's use a metaphor. Let's take the metaphor of a craftsman making a vessel. First of all, the craftsman has the desire to create the vessel. Then, in their mind, they put together a plan of how they're going to make this vessel. They then go and assemble all the raw materials necessary to make the vessel. Then they focus all their acumen, all their knowledge, all their skill into the materials. And at the moment of making of the vessel, they are completely invested within the vessel. Once that's finished, the craftsman sits back and has a look at the vessel, and if it's a beautiful piece of handiwork, the craftsman sits back and takes great pleasure and hana, benefit, and delight from the finished work. Now, that's exactly how Hashem created the world. The Torah tells us in Genesis that Hashem created the world through speech, through saying things. And God said, "Let there be light." In Pirkei Avos, it says, Ba'asara ma'amores nivra ha'olam. Add them all up, you'll see that Hashem made the world with 10 utterances. Why does the Torah use the metaphor of speech for creation? The answer is because, and this we have discussed in previous classes, so let's encapsulate the answer in form of synopsis. The answer is because in the transformation from the infinite to the finite, that was done through the vehicle of letters. Letters became and are the vessel through which the journey is made from the infinite to the finite. In terms of oiros and kalim, lights and vessels, the osius, the letters, are the configuration of the finite dimensions which are there within the Or Ein Sof, within the infinite light, which emerge through the Tzimtzum. Now, we've learned that there are 22 letters of the Aleph base. Each letter carries a certain power of divine creativity. And the way Hashem creates the world is through the combination of these powers. As explained in Sefer Yetzirah, in the Book of Formation, B'Sefer, the Sefer V'Sipur, there's a scribe, book, and a story, that one brick builds one house, 2 bricks builds 2 houses, 3 bricks builds 6 houses, 4 bricks 24, through the combination of letters, each of which is called a brick. So, for example, if you draw a circle and you write the 22 letters of the Aleph base around the circumference, the Aleph is connected with the base around the circumference. But if you draw a line between the Aleph and the Gimel, and then the Aleph and the Dalet, and so on and so forth, and you join up all the letters that way, you'll find that in total, there are 462 lines, or 231 lines, one way and the other way. These are called the Reish Lamed Aleph Sha'arim, the 231 gates forwards and backwards. It's interesting that the Torah says, Bishvil Yisrael Nivra Ha'olam, the world was created, you can translate it in the pathway, a shvil is a pathway of Yisrael. Yisrael stands for the words Yesh Reish Lamed Aleph. There are 231 gates. Those were the initial gates in which you have the name of Hashem woven into the fabric of those gates. And through the further combinations and transmutations of letters, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Shar HaYichud V'Amun and Tanya, the world was created. And as the Alter Rebbe says over there, Shmo Yasha Yikru Uloi B'Loshen HaKodesh, the name with which an item is called in Hebrew, in the Holy Tongue. For example, the word Even, Aleph, Ves, Nun, meaning a stone, which means the energy within the stone is configured in the letters Aleph, Ves, and Nun. Or Oir, meaning light, is configured in the letters Aleph, Vav, and Resh. And that's what it says by Yomer Elikim, and God said. Speech is a fraction of thought, which is a fraction of what is found further in the higher levels of nefesh. And to speak, the idea is, it is a form of contraction of infinite powers into finite creative packages. Now, the Baal Shem Tov explains that creation didn't just take place once, but rather it's an ongoing process. We say in davening, "Hamachadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis." Hashem renews every single day the works of creation, And not just every single day, but every single second. As the Baal Shem Tov explained on the Pasuk in Tehillim, La'olam Hashem, Devarecha nitzav b'shamayim. For eternity, God, your words stand in the heavens. Meaning that the words of the utterances, of the 10 utterances of Bereshis, of Genesis, those are constantly standing in the heavens, meaning God is constantly uttering those words, meaning that there's an ongoing, pulsating, divine, creative energy being pumped into the creation to make it ex nihilo, something from nothing every single second. And if, God forbid, God was to withdraw that energy, even for a second, the world would simply go back to its nothingness as it was before creation. This is all explained in Tanya, in Shara Yuchad Ve'emun. In reference to our discussion, we are left with a major question. And that is, if that is the case, if Hashem creates the world every single second, something from nothing, that must also take place on Shabbos. Because if it's not happening even for an instant, the world would cease to exist. And yet we see the world is ongoing on Shabbos. In fact, you can't really see the difference between the world on Friday and the world on Shabbos. So in what sense has Hashem, if you want, rested from the creative process? Let's take, in order to explain this, the concept of the Baal Teshuvah. The Rambam says, what is a Baal Teshuvah? A Baal Teshuvah is a person whom, in their original state, the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, the crass nature of the animal soul, covered, opaqued, concealed the light of the godly soul. They were overcome by a spirit of folly. They were not cognizant of true reality, of godliness, and this leads them to transgression. However, when a person does teshuvah, teshuvah comes from the word v'haruach toshuv el hu elokim asher nasana, and the spirit returns to God from where it came. Teshuvah essentially is return to a pristine state, to the state of cognizance that a person is fully aware of the divine presence. If a person is aware of that presence, then they would never enter into transgression. So the Rambam says that a Baal Teshuvah becomes a completely different person. He changes his name. He says, I'm not the same person as beforehand. Now, the truth is, nothing changes in the fabric of the actual body of the person. What does change is a huge change in their state of mind. Beforehand, the mind was diverted, and now the mind is focused and aware. Shabbos, Shin Beis Sof, has the letters Tov Shin Beis, Toshev or Teshuvah, because the root of Shabbos is that of Teshuvah. Shabbos is an element of Teshuvah, in the sense that although nothing physical changes on Shabbos, however, the state of being, of mind, does change on Shabbos. Let's explain this by rolling out the four-lettered name of Hashem, the Shem Havaya. It's explained that the four letters of Hashem's name, the letter Yud is the Sephira of Chochmah, which is parallel to the world of Atzilus. In the world of Atzilus, there it's completely full of Elokus, full of godliness. And the dominant sphere in the world of Atzilus is the sphere of Chachma. Chachma represents Bittul. Bittul is nullification, because in the world of Atzilus, all that exists is godliness. Even though there is manifest in the world of Atzilus Sephiros, Sephiros are modes of articulation, God's character traits. However, there's no independent being in Atzilus. All that you have in Atzilus is godliness. In the world of Bria, which corresponds to the letter Hey, the sphere of Bina, where the sphere of Bina is dominant in the world of Bria, you have a creation. Bereshis bara Elokim. Ramban explains that bara means creation, something from nothing. A new entity is born, an independent being, which, although it fully is cognizant of and recognizes and subordinate to the godliness in Atzilus, it nevertheless is a separate entity. It's the difference between the Shema and the Amidah. In the Shema, a person sits down in the world of the throne, covers their eyes, meditates and contemplates, says the Shema, and then Ve'ahavta. The person who exists loves God. So there is the person, there is God, and the person loves God. In the Amidah, we stand completely nullified. That's the world of Atzilus, where nothing else exists apart from godliness. As we go down into the next world, Vav, the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, even more independence is added, and there is dominant the spheres of Zeir Anpin, the Midos. There you have strong emotions. And finally, the last Hey of the name corresponds to the world of Asiyah, this world in which the Sephira of Malchus is dominant. Malchus kingship is the idea that there's a king and there's a people, and the people accept the dominion of the king. We could correlate and parallel the three worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah with the three soul garments of Machshava, thought, Dibur, speech, and Maisa, action. Think of yourself. Who are you? The answer is your intellect, your emotion, that's your soul. But your soul operates through soul garments. What are the garments of the soul? The innermost garment of the soul is your thought process. That's personal, private, inward. Then you have an outer garment called speech. That's used for communication to others. You don't need speech when you're by yourself. And then you have a further garment called action. Speech is actually related to you because it's coming out of your mouth, it's connected to you. Whereas action, you can do something and make something, and then it can exist by itself. So we can parallel the world of Bria to the world of Machshava, thought. We can parallel the world of Yetzirah to the world of Dibur, speech. And we can parallel the word of Asiyah to the world of action, deed. Our souls also exist on those levels. The Midrash says there are 5 names to the soul. These aren't the same names for the same thing. They are names of different levels of the soul. The soul, as it is in the world of Asiyah, is called Nefesh. As it is in the world of Yetzirah, it's called Ruach. As it is in the world of Bria, it's called Neshama. As it is in the world of Atzilus, it's called Chaya, and Haya, it's called Yechida. So when we talk about this speech metaphor in creation, in fact, what we're talking about is God communicating and investing outwards in something which is an independent being or existence. That is called supernal Melaka, work. In the sense that not because it's difficult for God to do, but it's something which is creative. It's creating an independent being. And the further it goes, and the more independent the being, the more creative and work is involved. So let's go back to our parable of the craftsman. Whilst the craftsman is invested in it, he's completely in there. Those are the 6 days of creation. And in those 6 days of creation, Hashem is, if you want, invested in the creation. He's making it. On Shabbos, the craftsman sits back and takes the hands away, looks at the vessel and marvels at it, has delight in it. That's the level of thought, of machshava. It's not deed or speech, but it's thought. Sit back, think about it, look at it, enjoy it. So if we wanted to use different terminology, we could say that on Shabbos there's called aliyas ha'olamos. There's an elevation in the worlds. We go from the level of speech to the level of thought. This is what we mean when we say that God rested on the 7th day. It doesn't mean he stopped creation, because if he would stop creating the world would cease to exist. What it means is that the status of being on the 7th day is not on the level of deed or speech, but rather the world gets its energy from the level of thought, of tainug. Now, since, as we said beforehand, the collective Jewish soul is made in the image of God, therefore the modus operandi of the Jew during the week must reflect how God makes the world during the week, and on Shabbos must reflect the status on Shabbos. So on Shabbos, our state is one of tainug, one of delight, which is why we eat foods of delight. That's why we speak only words of Torah and not words which shouldn't be spoken about during the weekday. It's on Shabbos that we get a neshama yesera, an additional soul. Where do neshamas inhabit? They originally come from the world of Bria, which is the higher Garden of Eden, in the sense that every Jew receives on Shabbos access to a deeper level of their soul. That's called the neshama yesera, the higher and deeper level of their soul, as it is in the world of Bria. And all that is reflected because that's what Hashem is doing. And that's what we're doing. What Hashem does, we emulate. Now we'll understand that there are, in fact, 2 modes of working and resting. There's the work of the week, and there is the resting of Shabbos. And that is both for Hashem and for us. In other words, our avodas Hashem, our service Hashem during the week is quite different than it is on Shabbos. Be'ezras Hashem, with the help of Hashem, we will, in the next class, explain what is the spiritual work during the week, and what is the spiritual work on Shabbos and how it differs. We'll also explain what are the 39 categories of work which must be exercised, as it says you should work during the weekday, and not just physical commerce, but also spiritual inner work of 39 categories, and that becomes prohibited on Shabbos. On Shabbos, it's a different type of experience. We'll also look at the relationship between weekday and Shabbos. That on the one hand, only somebody who prepares during the week will eat on Shabbos, and yet we'll learn that it's the blessing of Shabbos that gives a blessing to the entire week. And Be'ezras Hashem, we will roll this out in further shiurim with Hashem's help. Let's finally remember, though, that Shabbos is me'ein olam haba, that everything that we've said just now, let's place in a wider and a greater context. And that is, the Talmud in Sanhedrin says that this world has 6 millennia, and in the 7th, we'll enter into a new era, which are the days of Mashiach and the era of Techiyas HaMesim, of the resurrection. So everything that we're talking now in microcosm will also be played out in macrocosm in terms of the coming of Mashiach. Where are we up to now? Well, at this point, we are Friday afternoon, getting ready for Shabbos. It's ready, and we are ready to usher in the Shabbos, the Yom Shekula Shabbos Menucha L'Chayo Elamim, the day which will all be a Shabbos, the day that, in fact, just like the Baal Teshuvah switches the mind of operation, we will also have and need to start now, as the Rebbe said, living with Mashiach, because our mind, our status of mind will change when Mashiach will come. We'll start having and living on a different level of reality than we did beforehand. And through the learning of Chassidus and the learning of the inner levels of the Torah, it helps condition us and prepare the world around us for this beautiful coming day of Shabbos. Thank you.